3, 2, 1. Anthony Darby.
Chuck Hen.
We are here with Laura Barrett-Nutting with RN for Wellness. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
It is good to be back. It has been about 2 months since we've been behind the microphone, and I feel a little rusty in the seat, but excited.
It's not our rookie year anymore. We're back into season 2. We're seasoned sophomores.
And are in the PAH studio. Yeah. So I'm super excited. If you guys have noticed, Brandon has added some flavor to our digs, and we now have like a little studio set up. You see the chamber award and some of our shirts and just a little bit of cultural artifacts and a little bit more of a resemblance of kind of what we represent at PAH and just some ways to personalize it.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to try to provide more of, is a little bit more of that in-depth look, kind of into us and our culture and the people that we know in the industry, because we feel like you guys really enjoy that kind of stuff, listening to it and seeing it. So the more that we can do to bring that stuff to light, I think the better in this season. Yeah,
really a true behind the scenes look at what's going on. And we have some huge announcements coming up over the next few weeks and a lot of really large projects going on. And I think this will be a great way for us to continue to keep everyone up to date. But also because we have so many things going on, the content and the behind the scenes is going to be really, really exciting. So
yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to be really cool.
So stay tuned. Of course, like everything else, nothing's official till it's official. But once it is, we will make the announcement, and it'll be really great news for our patients, something that's been asked for very often. So welcome back for listening to us. We're super thankful to have everyone listening and engaging with us. It's humbling. It's honored for sure. So for our first guest of season 2 in the new digs, we thought it was very appropriate to have Nurse Laura, as you're affectionately known around the PH world and at some of the other dispensaries that you participate in. I'll give you my first introduction to Laura, and then I would love for you to share kind of your story, because you have an amazing background, and patients in Maryland are really lucky to have someone with your certification and resources available to them. So I know that I am amazingly thrilled to have you working with our CBD line and helping support some of our patients and some of our initiatives. So it's amazing. I first met you when you were with Verano. And for our patients that can think back to like December 2017 and the early spring of 2018, you'll remember that some of the most sought after products out there were Verano. And so much so that we would get these crazy small orders where, like, I would joke and be like, "Hey, Laura, thanks for driving 2.5 hours to bring me an ounce of flour, but I'm just going to put this in my personal stock and it's never going to see the shelves." Truthfully, we literally didn't advertise that we carried Verano for probably up until the middle of the summer, until the supply really increased. We kept it as it was called our private stock. So if you were, one of the patients that frequented us often, kind of a VIP patient, we would put the stuff aside, because when it was coming out, Mag Landrace and Gelato and the Jack G6, it was amazing flower. It was an amazing product. But the quantities were so limited that it was almost like, I almost felt bad sometimes that you were driving that far to give us such little, but you were tenacious and you were really about the medicine that you were bringing down, and your level of support, and immediately wanting to engage with our staff. I want to do staff trainings. I want to make sure that folks are supported in properly supporting our product to patients. And, we didn't see that from everybody. A lot of the other wholesalers, they didn't have their act together as well as you did. So, I was immediately pressed from the first time I met you at your tenacity and your ability to serve patients and your commitment. So it's really neat now that things happen so fast in the cannabis industry where, if people follow the news and they know that Verano is going through different strategies in terms of where they're going long-term, possibly acquisition, and things get shaken up. And here we are. You're on our podcast. You have your own business. Yes. You're supporting. You're now a clinical director at a dispensary in Maryland, and you've really gotten a lot of growth. So you haven't always been in the cannabis industry. What was college? College was for nursing?
At first, college was because I was going to be a nun.
That's right.
Yes. I actually went from high school to the convent.
That's correct.
I was going to be Sister Laura
of
Nurse Laura.
Instead of Nurse Laura.
Man.
Right.
It's quite a different outcome of life, right?
Right. And now I'm the weed nurse. It's really...
From a nun to a weed nurse.
It's really... All of my high school friends just can't even believe that I work in the cannabis industry.
And that's right. So the convent... through your exploration there, turned out that...
How long were you in the convent for?
So 2 years. I was called pre-novitiate. Wow. So I hadn't actually taken orders and become a nun. I was in school studying to become a nun. And going back and forth
free spirit card, right?
Between Miami to New Orleans. So I've only ever been to the French Quarter with nuns.
Ooh.
I know.
It's a different experience than most have at the French Quarter,
I need to go back
I'm sure.
sometime. So I'm a part of, fast forward, I'm a part of this American Cannabis Nurses Association, and their conference this year is in New Orleans. And so this time I think I'll actually go as a nurse and not a nun.
That's awesome.
So it'll be kind of a funny full circle.
So the nun to nurse transition.
Yeah, so they didn't think I was cut out to be a nun. I actually got kicked out of the convent.
That's right.
They said they thought I needed to be a mother, and I think they were right. But at the time, I wasn't ready for that. So I very quickly went from nun to nurse. Very quick. It was a quick transition with college to be able to become at least a 2-year degree registered nurse. And then I just kind of kept going to school because I like school. And I went and I worked. I lived in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I worked in what I thought was the big downtown, Broward County, Florida.
Yeah.
Until I moved many years later to Baltimore. And when they asked me if I had ever worked in this city, and I'm like, oh, yeah. I worked with like gunshots. And I worked in... a trauma center.
But you haven't worked in Baltimore.
And that's exactly what. They're like, you won't be able to walk to your car. And so my first interview was
downtown
with this.
Fort Lauderdale, you can literally walk with an open container. It's a lot more like seersucker shorts and guys walking with mixed drinks than it is like what you may find walking from out of Johns Hopkins Hospital.
It's Johns Hopkins, by the way.
Oh, sorry.
But yes, it was very, very different. So I did have severe cases. I had a patient attack me because she was trying to switch out her urine in the bathroom because she was on drugs and she didn't want to get caught. And I opened the door and she jumped me. I had patients that were handcuffed to beds. I mean, we had some stuff. No, this was in Fort Lauderdale. But all of that happens in half an hour at Johns Hopkins at the main campus. And just getting from the car to the hospital and back, I was really in for it. So fast forward so multiple jobs. So my first big nursing job was this trauma center job. Lots of great experience, lots of blood and guts. And I didn't like that people were so sick. I got really sort of turned off by dealing with sickness and not wellness because a lot of patients died and the families were miserable and then they were gone and I had no follow through. So I moved into case management for a little while and it was interesting. I learned a lot about how to manage patients and why people that like go out of work on workers' compensation end up staying out of work if they're out of work for so many days. Like I just learned about the mentality and the cycle of injury or disability to health and wellness. And again, thought, yeah, but I'm not working with wellness. I'm still working with illness. So then I moved back into nursing on the floor, but total hips and total knees and more of like a rehab vibe, some brain surgery. And this is where we were taking people who had been well that had just like a dysfunction, either a fall or aging, something happened. And then we were bringing them back to healthier than ever. And that's where I really got a little bit more into education. I was doing patient education programs, like really prepping them for surgery, way before surgery, so they'd be prepared for how hard recovery would be. And I realized...
include things like coaching for weight loss for someone's getting a knee replacement and things like that?
Yeah, so I even floated sometimes into like bariatric surgery. And really, this is a whole nother topic, but someone who at least in the past, years ago when I was doing this, wanted to be considered to have weight loss surgery, bariatric surgery, had to go through all kinds of testing, sleep testing, health and wellness testing, psychological testing. We really had to believe that you were a candidate that was going to do the work.
Yeah, my mom had gastric bypass, and it was in that 2004 or 5 range, and there was a slew of, and there was even some weight loss requirements before surgery. Like they have to prove that that this is something that you're really committed to.
Right, and you have to decrease your calorie intake because otherwise, day after surgery, you can eat a teaspoonful of food and you're hungrier for much more. So that was an interesting phase. I did that for quite a while, and then just kept ending up more on the education side. So I became more of a nurse educator. And then this electronic health record stuff, I think I was telling you before, the electronic health record, this everything being electronic, everything being communicated over the computer was becoming so popular. And I had this knack of teaching people things when they didn't really feel like they were learning. And so the doctors I'd be their nurse and they'd say, Laura, can you help me out? I don't know how to. And I would kind of show the doctors how to do it. And then before long, they're like, this is a job. We need to put you in this position. We need you to be in charge of teaching people how to do things. So they taught me how to write curriculum and helped me develop coursework. And I learned about PowerPoint and Captivate and e-learnings really early on. I mean, this is in maybe 2000.
Yeah, this is
I'm not that old. I got to try to think about how old.
You're still hearing the
I definitely had dial-up internet there.
I've been a nurse for like 23 years now. So, I mean, it's been a while.
Your MBA, did that come as a process of getting involved in electronic health records and being more on the business side of things? Or when did that come through? Because you have an MBA as well.
I do. So I had gone through and just got my bachelor's in nursing. And then most nurses would go and get a master's of science in nursing or a PhD in nursing and become an educator. And I just knew that I wanted to do more. Like I never became a nurse because I wanted to be a nurse on the floor. I knew I wasn't going to be a bedside nurse forever. But I knew that as a nurse, I would have opportunities all over the world in different types of jobs because of that nursing background. So I've done some legal nurse consulting where I've reviewed medical records for lawyers as parts of cases. And I've done home health nursing when I had my kids and I only wanted to go and I'd do 3 infusions a week in someone's house and then I'm back home with my babies. I have done this case management, which was a lot of remote telephonic type work. I did education and then my life turned sort of upside down because my husband at the time, his job was moving us from Florida to Maryland. And all of a sudden I was just like I had this wonderful cushy job. They made me director of informatics, this new position with
Sounds
this
cool.
electronic health record. I had an office. I was like, okay, so this makes sense. And
Miami and Fort Lauderdale's not the worst place to be in January and February.
Well, and I was in Weston, which is like the fancy part of Fort Lauderdale. So, I mean, I had a pretty nice life. And I had started my MBA then. So once I was going to be in this informatics role and I was seeing, okay, this administrative bent is coming, I need to get a higher degree. I knew I always wanted to get a master's degree in something. And so I just started to think about healthcare administration, the couple of options that were out there. There were no informatics programs back then. And I really am not an IT person anyhow, although my old Epic team would probably laugh at that. So I thought MBA, that just makes sense. Like it just makes sense to have a basic knowledge of business related items. And I did MBA with an organizational management, like second degree track. Yeah. So that was really helpful as I was sort of moving through large healthcare, hospital healthcare administration. And so when I moved to Maryland, I started trying to kind of figure out what to do, where to work. I was introduced to a gentleman who sort of worked in construction with my ex-husband, and he did a lot of wellness volunteering. And I'm sharing this story because it actually relates to how I ended up in cannabis. So I was introduced to this gentleman who had like a glass company, and we just started talking as he's working on my house because I bought a fixer-upper. And he's like, oh, health and wellness, nurse, do you want to volunteer with my friend? He does something about health and wellness. And sure enough, we started volunteering, and 10 years later, we were still volunteering together.
Is that Carrie?
That's Carrie.
Got
Yeah.
it.
So for years, I volunteered in Central Maryland in Howard County, promoting health and wellness in the community, bringing together large community organizations and the government. So Howard County government, Howard County Health Department, Howard County Library, Howard County Schools, the hospital, which eventually was Hopkins, bringing them all together to support, let's have our community be healthy and well and have free programs, not just things that you have to have a private gym membership or pay a nutritionist. So that really worked for me. And what I ended up doing as I worked for this not-for-profit over the years, which I'm on the board of that not-for-profit, it's called We Promote Health, I ended up being the coordinator of all things, like the one who on the day of the big event, I was the stagehand and I was speaking in the mic and doing lots of things, and found that I am pretty comfortable speaking to groups of people. And I am good at sort of encouraging, cheerleading, let's say, people to get on board with something. And, you know, if we're doing a Zumba demonstration and everybody's just standing around, I had enough kind of charm to go out there and start doing it and pulling people in and getting people engaged. So fast forward multiple years after my work at Hopkins on this electronic health record product, because that's what I ended up doing. When I moved here, I interviewed for a couple of hospitals, one of which was called Maryland General. It doesn't exist anymore, but it was in apparently such a bad neighborhood. It was really scary just trying to get to the interview. And I walked in, and on the same day during the interview, they offered me a director level job. Like, you can start tomorrow.
You're like, nobody else is coming to work here.
Right?
You want it, you got it.
Never mind.
So I came home and I'm like, hey,
I'm good, but I'm not that good.
Right. So then I ended up going to work first at the community hospital in Howard County called Howard County General, which I still have lots of wonderful connections. It's like a smaller, even though it's part of Hopkins, it's a real community feel. And so I worked there mostly with the doctors and nurses, doing education and particularly helping anesthesiologists and surgeons get notes in the computer.
So my college career left me right by there. So I went to Howard Community College for about a year and a half, and we had to do like our long tour runs. It was all around the hospital campus. Mm-hmm. I knew a couple of shortcuts around those buildings.
Goalies.
to catch up to everybody else.
Well, and I don't know if you've been back there in a while. They have really expanded that college campus. It's beautiful.
Everything looks different.
And the hospital expanded too, but Howard Community College, they really have done a great job.
Yeah. So you are championing wellness efforts in Howard County. You're working at the hospital, and I guess at some point in time, someone comes up and says, hey, I'm working on a new health initiative, and this seems like a good idea to bring you involved. Yes,
it was really a very interesting conversation. So my friend Carrie, who I worked with on this not-for-profit, calls me up one day and says, and I didn't normally talk to Carrie routinely. We talked mostly when it was time to be doing one of these events. And he's like, I have an opportunity I'm wondering if you're interested in. I'd like to bring you in on something. And I'm like, okay, I'm interested. What is it? He's like, well, you're a nurse and you're an educator type and you're comfortable talking in front of people. And I said, yes. And he said, so I just got a license to grow cannabis. I was wondering if you were interested in being our nurse. And I said, what's cannabis? and he, of course, was just like, what? And I just, he's weed, pot, joint, doobie.
Yeah.
and I really was so taken aback. I remember like where I was sitting, and I kind of just sat down, and I was like, so you're gonna grow like you're asking me to come and like sell drugs with you? I really didn't understand.
Isn't this illegal? Yeah.
I had no idea that it was legal. I had no idea there was an application process, and it's very humbling in many ways, because I think of myself as someone who stays on top of things enough and has an idea of what's going on, especially medically. And I had been involved with cancer patients previously, and I knew our sort of unwritten cannabis policies, which I was calling marijuana then, policies about, letting maybe a patient smoke a joint outside or something if they were dealing with chemotherapy. So I knew a little bit from the medical perspective, but hardly anything. And once I got it, okay, weed, that's what you're talking about, and it's legal and you're going to grow it. And what do you want me to do? And he said, well, first, I just want you to really get a grip of what it is and what the research is. There's a lot of research. You should do some and get back to me. So I took a week. I started reading everything I could find, went back to work, talked to every doctor I knew about cannabis. They all knew what cannabis meant. And I found so many very scientific, very medical, highly respected physicians that I trusted saying, it's amazing medicine. It can help many people. Let me know if you go do that. And so that was interesting. And then Carrie sent another sort of co-founder of that company, which was Chrissy Bernazzani, the pharmacist. He sent her to my house, and I didn't know her at the time, to talk to me. She's a research person. And so she brought some data with her, and she brought, like a file. Here's some more research for you to read. And we talked for a while. Carrie was there too. And that's when it really started to hit me. No, it's not just YouTube videos about kids that aren't having seizures anymore. I was really discounting the anecdotal evidence. I was really looking for, I want scientific,
research,
evidence-based
and,
research. And Chrissy was able to provide some of that for me. So that was really helpful. That really started helping me to turn the corner.
Just real quick, let's give Chrissy a shout out because she's been a good friend to Dr. Hoffman and our dispensary for a long time. She is the clinical director of Zenleaf currently and does an amazing job there. If I've sent patients to her, so if you're in the Waldorf or you're in that Southern Maryland area and you're looking for a true clinical director that gets it and is in line, Chrissy, I can't pronounce her last name. Bernazzani. And Chuck, her son, has some sick lettuce coming out of his hockey helmet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I mean,
extra
some real
props,
machuga.
Christy. Yeah.
So Chrissy's like, she's definitely
definitely a hockey mom.
Yeah, definitely a hocky mom.
I can
see her screaming and yelling in the stands.
Don't mess with a hockey mom. I'll tell you that much. I grew
tough.
up playing hockey. Like, hockey moms are tough. They have to stand in the cold for the majority of the year. There's nothing else that they want to do in the world. Anything else they want to do but stand there and watch a bunch of kids skate around on the ice in the cold.
So funny.
Right? Yeah, I'm glad I don't have a hockey playing
So
kid.
Chrissy comes in and she's presenting for the first time some real clinical evidence. I'm assuming she's probably pulling out like a JAMA article, right? Or there's only a few. At that time, we could probably shout off
Only a few. She told me about Dr. Mishulam. She told me about Ethan Russo. Those were really some of the major things that she shared. And then they also directed me towards like the MMCC and Comar, and I started reading. And again, constantly, I was still working my day job, going back and forth and talking to everyone that would listen, asking them questions about cannabis as medicine and what they knew and if they had information. And most of them did not have actual research or data or information, but they said, off the record, cannabis is medicine, it works. Let me know when you have a business. Let me know where I can send patients. So I wasn't ready, and as a startup, you guys know for sure, you don't have money to start just paying salaries. And I made a really good salary at Hopkins. I had worked my way up, and I was in a high level. So it was really challenging. As much as my heart was saying more and more, I want to jump, I want to go work with this weed stuff full time. It was very challenging financially. So
this is the part where we bring every guest admit that they had to take a monster pay cut to come to the cannabis industry, and just to make sure that we dispel any delusions of grandeur that if you're doing really well in the regular industry, you're going to come to the cannabis industry and double down on your profit money. That's not how it works. But go ahead.
Yes. So that is absolutely
That's
true
our disclaimer for every show.
I think every guest come on, it makes me feel better about myself.
Yes. So at first,
And
we
honestly,
all were
truthfully,
working our other jobs and
honestly,
working
there's
just
a ton
volunteering.
of people, Chuck and Corpon, they had to see the business come through before they could jump on full time. Dr. Hoffman and myself, we we're in a really weird position that we were both able to do that. But there's a ton of people that sit on the sidelines every day, and they would love, or they feel like they would love to do what we do, but because of the finances, because it's still an emerging market, and the reality is that there's not a ton of super high paying jobs this early in the market, a lot of folks are faced with this challenge like that you did, where they're super excited about this every night, but they know they have to get up in the morning and go to work the next day to pay the bills.
Yes.
So
yes. And my husband is reminding me of that these days.
Today. That
thankfully he's getting up and paying the bills, because I'm not paying the bills these days. So interesting. After
so what was like the moment? So you're feeling more and more passionate that this is a viable medicine, and almost, if you're like us, that there's this truth that needs to be shared, right? Like, how could no one else know that all this great things can come from a plant?
Really? Well, and Kerry had told me, he said to me, once you get it, you're not gonna be able to sleep. You're gonna dream about cannabis. You're gonna think about cannabis. You're gonna feel like your head will explode if you don't tell someone about cannabis. And that's exactly what happened. I went back to work every day at Hopkins, and I found a way to bring every conversation into talking about the benefits of medical cannabis. And I was spending so much time educating and talking to people that finally one day, it was around 9 months to a year, my boss at Hopkins said, you might just need to take the leap. And I was like, yeah, I know. I need this salary. I have a good salary. I have a good job. I have children. I have stuff to support. They can't pay me. And he said, he's like, I'm not going to fire you, but I want you to know, I really think you should really think hard on this and consider taking the risk. We'll be here. You're a good employee, we'll be here. And so then I went and talked to his boss too and verified, if I leave and want to come back, if this industry just tanks, because this was so early on, nobody,
we knew nothing.
We had stage 1 licensing. We didn't have stage 2. We really didn't know. We were going to that, courthouse meeting to say no more delays. We didn't
at that
know.
point, in case anybody's forgotten, there was the initial delays put on by the Black Caucus. At that point, there were only 2 growers that had stage 2 complete. Everyone else was in a stage 1, and they literally tabled the entire program. I remember we had just started building out, I think, right?
No, I think it was more towards the end of it. We were almost done. I feel like we were
almost
done
ready to open?
with our build out, and we were to the point almost where we were calling vendors to see when product might come online, all these different things, and all of a sudden the injunction came down from the courts, and everybody was kind of like,
at that point, Flora Grow and Curio were the only 2 that were starting to put plant seeds or seedlings or whatever they started with. So it was there was zero proof or understanding that this was going to be a successful market.
Actually going to happen.
Right. That we were ever going to get open, product was ever coming to the market. And at one point I remember we passed our inspection sometime around June, July-ish.
It was October?
August.
I'm sorry.
It had to be in summertime, because I remember telling Chuck, there's no way that by Halloween we're not open, or I won't be alive, because I wasn't going to be able to handle it any longer, right? And
it's a really stressful time.
And Chuck goes, no, it won't be it won't be until December, or after Thanksgiving, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he was obviously right, but there was a crazy time. So to Laura's point, just to reiterate, it's easy to look at October 16th, 2019 and say, oh, this is a budding industry, but in 2017 in October, we had no clue any of this was.
I remember us. I mean, like Darby said, we passed our inspections from the county, so our certificate of occupancy, the fire marshal inspection, we had all this in hand, and it took us 6 weeks to schedule.
We're calling MMCC.
Calling the MMCC every day, trying to get inspection. We have everything complete, send them all the information. And I mean,
Rubino.
Through the Rubino process. And I remember points and times just sitting there being we built this place out.
And now
we have done everything we did. We're paying for it. We have these expenses we're incurring right now. Is this thing ever gonna come?
You can't hire employees.
Yeah, we didn't hire any employees. The whole thing. So we kind of sat on our hands and just waited for the legislative process to take its place. But there were some sleepless nights in there.
Yes.
It was difficult.
So I'll try to just move forward a tiny bit. So in the end, it worked out that we were able to come up with the ability to pay a couple of us a little bit of money at Free State, what was Free State Wellness at the time. So I did go ahead and give my notice, and I left Hopkins, and I joined, again, what was Free State Wellness. And I took a $45,000 pay cut, and I just moved on. And I worked more hours,
you have less stability.
Yes, everything.
No cell phone allowances.
I moved out of my, gorgeous all-windowed office on the 5th floor overlooking the Inner Harbor to, a trailer
closet.
Yes, and became a janitor. I mean, I did pretty much every job. Most of us did. In the beginning, just like you guys know, we did every job.
I have 5 people.
Clean the bathroom.
And these 5 people all need to do the important stuff, so they have to do the unimportant stuff too, because you can't hire anybody to do.
Right, and we were setting up. First of all, early on, it was all about mission, vision, logo, all this very just fun stuff that I learned when I was working on my MBA.
The ideation part of it, right?
I really was good at that, and I loved that. And SOPs, writing standard operating procedures. But once I actually came on full time and we moved into the building, a big warehouse, it was a whole different story. I became a grow employee. I was one of the first grow employees. So I actually, for the first time ever in my life, because I had never smoked a joint. For the first time in my life, I was now around the plant. And I learned about growing, and I learned about harvesting, and I did harvesting.
Drying and curing.
I was helping to work on the metric piece because I had this IT experience. So I had 10 different titles at some point or another, but whoever kind of showed that they were good at something, you did that job too, right? So I did a lot of jobs. And so it was even more amazing. So now I had done the research. I still hadn't really ever been around anyone who was using cannabis. I didn't go to parties with people using cannabis. I wasn't familiar with the plant. I had just heard stories and now read some research. And so now here I am, hands-on in scrubs with gloves and masks and touching the plant and understanding how sticky trichomes are and understanding sugar leaves and what goes to trim and what's trash and green waste and just learning it all side by side while we're training employees. I was learning too.
Sure.
And it was an amazing experience that I'm so grateful for, because there are many people that might have the same education level as I now have from different online trainings or reading books about cannabis as medicine, but not many of them. I don't know any other registered nurses in Maryland, honestly, that have had this experience where they were a part of setting up and building from startup phase a grow facility.
Yeah, that's intangible. And listening to your story and your experiences, I mean, you really have had a lot of traditional experiences from the hospital organization and things like that. And then to come into a vertically integrated operator and to be able to have to be so hands-on and all that, it definitely gave you a different view. And it's interesting because you're one of the few folks that that I'm thinking of that really weren't a part of the culture at all of cannabis and didn't really have this personal experience with cannabis. Most of us, like, people ask me, how'd you get into it? I always had this personal experience with cannabis. I always saw it as a medicine and never really aligned with the cultural side of cannabis, like the,
You never had dreadlocks?
Woodstocks. No, I've never had dreadlocks, and I can't stand the smell of petroleum oil.
You could maybe put some locks in your beard.
I probably could. It'll look great. And my business friends couldn't understand how I could take 3 bong hits and then out cold call them and go out work them, and it was just so I always felt like I was like in this like weird space. But for you, this was really about helping people because you didn't have that personal experience. You didn't use CBD or cannabis yourself until after you helped people for a while. So I find that interesting.
Yeah.
So you're kind of doing the day-to-day stuff with Verano and the grow, and I guess you were probably working like on more of the internal stuff for the first few months because there wasn't a lot of outreach to do. I mean, by the time you started coming to us, there were probably only 10 dispensaries open, right?
Yes, it was really interesting. So early on, it was mostly about, hiring and SOPs and just setting up and getting everything compliant for stage 2, getting ready to get our license and be able to open. And then it was actually growing the plants. And, there's a 3 to 4 month kind of wait there. So I very early on started going out. We had created a list of all of the pre-approved dispensaries, and I just started building relationships. So doing kind of what I did with you, even before I had any product to offer. I honestly, a couple people called me out on it. I really had no idea how great our product was going to be, if it was going to be amazing flower as I was sharing it was going to be, what I believed it was going to be, or not. Although I had a benefit because we did have a company that we had partnered with who had been growing in another state.
Illinois, right?
And so I did have some lab reports and some idea to be able to describe the product and say what we expected it to be.
Did the genetics come from them? The genetics that you guys used?
I prefer to not specifically say, especially since I don't work for them anymore.
Fair enough. So you did have some folks that were already in the industry for support as you guys were moving through this process in terms of understanding, do we have something that's good or do we have something that's bad? I got to imagine they were fairly excited when they started seeing the results of the first harvest from you guys, because you guys, from just a strictly statistic standpoint, the flower that you guys were putting out, and terpene profiles and cannabinoid profiles were better, or at least top tier to what we were seeing at the time, right?
Yes. And again, I don't want to speak too much on Verano's behalf just because I am no longer with Verano. However, I will say that I was told that I could go out and confidently speak about it being a very high quality product. And I did that based on what I was told, because I just had no reason not to believe it, and that it turned out to be this amazing, beautiful, highly naturally terped, infused, just all by itself, just based on lighting and different things, the way that we were growing and the genetics, was such a blessing.
Yep.
Because it really did help. If I had the great talk and great relationship building skills and then delivered a garbage product, that wouldn't have worked so well. So having a good product, and then the branding, I really see so strong how important being able to support with branding and consistency and assisting the dispensaries. So because I worked hard to create displays and to bring packaging and to help dispensaries have a way to set up their dispensary, I was like a cheerleader.
Yeah, one of our first, I can remember this very specifically, but you guys dropped off a few posters, right? And that was one of the first times that a vendor had provided that. But they were cool posters, and they went through terpenes, and they went through cannabinoids, and they were educationally based. And you guys did a really good job of that piece of the branding. And it is so important. There's a particular product, I won't call it out by name, but it's a topical product that we carry at our dispensary. And it's actually one of the more therapeutic products that I've seen. The packaging in it is horrible. The name is worse than the packaging. And because of that, it never sold. Mm-hmm. The first name in the product was called D-A, something. So, we all have a responsibility here when we were in 2017 and 2018 in terms of what the face of medical cannabis looked like in Maryland. Mm-hmm. And I'm so thankful that Verano and Curio and some of these folks they were very sophisticated in terms of how they came to market with their branding, packaging, with their branding, with their supporting documentation. It makes all the difference in the world to the dispensary when we're talking about to a patient. If I have to look back and look at my flower list, and the only sativa that I have in today, and this is actually a true story. So someone came in, it was a father with their daughter who was wheelchair bound. They were looking for a sativa. The only sativa I had in was Pootie Tang.
No.
Yeah. So now I have to have an educational conversation around using Pootie Tang, and it was a disgusting feeling. It was a horrible feeling. I want to validate that I'm in real medical practice here, and I'm using funny names like Pootie Tang. So you guys didn't do any of that nonsense. All of your packaging was easy to read. I thought the supporting documentation was really good, and I know that you had a huge footprint in that. So once again, I think you guys did a really great job on that piece of it. And it's so important.
Thank you. Yes. And I've really, so early on, as I was going out and setting up the contracts, so working with, our lawyer, and we wrote they wrote this very long contract that some dispensaries didn't want to sign, but I had to be able to talk through that with dispensaries.
You did a good job as well.
And then
the first person actually mandated a certain buying portion of us, so we contractually were obligated to carry a certain amount of Verano. Lucky for them, they could never meet the demand. I was like, all right, when you guys get past 2 ounces, I'll start worrying about this.
I know. I was the butt end of a lot of jokes about that. Between that and the driving all over, because I was a delivery girl, right? Sales girl, delivery girl, harvest girl. So yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing experience. Then helping set up processing, because we had processing, sort of, and then the dispensary. So being involved in our own dispensary, the Zenleaf dispensaries in the beginning, again, was just really good experience, and it really helped me to see where the shortfalls were, where we needed more support. And then when I was working with selling those products, I would go into the dispensaries and I would really make sure to educate their staff, because many of the dispensaries that didn't have a clinical person, either as one of their owners or an assigned clinical director, a pharmacist, many of them didn't know what to teach their staff. So I really think customer service is the number one most important thing.
Supporting the products, right?
But then supporting the products and the patients, also, and knowing some of the science is really helpful. I mean, customer service for sure is the number one thing. So what I found myself doing was I would offer, as part of my bringing you these products, is I would at least teach about the medicine behind and why each of them is different, and the different routes of administration, and make sure that they had empty samples, and make sure that the dispensary staff was able to open each of the containers, those eighth containers in the beginning when we all first came to market. Some people couldn't open them.
Yeah, we got our first containers. We didn't know how to open it.
I had a little bit of an issue myself trying to open it.
Right. So I would bring empties and then practice and make sure that the staff could open them, and then encourage them to use those empties to help patients, and make sure before you send, especially an older patient with arthritis or someone, with some kind of handicap, before you send them home with this, make sure they can open it, but you had to use the empty one to be compliant.
Sure.
And then just the whole nursing background and IT background, following the rules and being compliant and doing all the metric stuff.
Yeah, I was going to say the metric stuff
just made sense
huge,
to me, right? To me, that was just easy. So I worked on like all the metric reporting for the grow, and then eventually some for the dispensary, just to keep things going. And that's not my favorite thing, but I just happened to be able to do it.
We all fall in that category sometimes. Get
Yeah,
saddled
you
with
don't
stuff
always
we're
get
not
to do
really,
your
but in
favorite.
the end,
No.
it's like super important.
Like,
it's got to get done.
Right.
We actually use attorneys now, but in the beginning it was Chuck and I basically doing all the lawyering, and like it's two guys who are fairly knowledgeable at life trying to decipher legal documentation and things like that. And I look at all the different roles that we had to play. I mean, even when we first opened the dispensary, I may have been your security guard when you walked in.
Right.
I was probably your cashier. I did patient consulting. Like, I was literally in every role within the dispensary, on top of trying to make sure we had product and on the phone. I mean, when we first opened up, it was literally me calling, "Hey, Laura, like, I need some product. Please bring me 3/4 of an ounce or whatever it is you got."
Well, and it's kind of interesting, because I think right now we're having what sounds like a little bit of a flower shortage. So it's sort of back to those same conversations.
Yeah.
Please, do you have anything?
Well, that's what the conversations kind of are.
Yeah, so honestly,
I mean, I'm sad.
You bring that
it's
up
for a
and-
different reason.
So it's just, if anyone's listening and pissed off that on Monday we only had 3 selections of flower. One was a CBD strain. There is a shortage of flower right now in the market, and we are, I think we're starting to navigate through it. We're lucky that we do have a great relationship with our vendors. We can kind of lean on them a little bit in some of these times of struggle, but there's a lot of different reasons why there's a shortage of flower right now. A lot of different cultivars have different stories, but there absolutely is a flower shortage right now. And when you see the menus depleted across the state, it's something that I hope is very temporary. I hope that there's an abundance coming with the fall harvest in the November-December timeframe. But it's very much reminding me of what it was like in the beginning, where I spent a lot of my time calling and saying, "Are you good? Can you come deliver? Like, when are we going to have flower?"
Right.
So it's weird, these different ebbs and flows of the business. But you identified it. We're there right now.
And at least today we have other products. We do have all the processed products. So that's helpful. More processors are online, so we do have other products. In the beginning, all we had was flour. There were no processed products. So that was even more challenging because it was flour or nothing.
Yeah.
So at least now there are other products, but then, with all of the vaping concerns, it's just a whole nother level of where do we go?
I had that down to talk about as well, especially my biggest concern would be an overstretch of regulation on vapes. At the same time, you have a flower shortage that could really create a negative storm and drive a lot of patients, quite frankly, to the black market, which is my big fear. So we bounce around a little bit. If we can jump, because I feel like you've done a really great job of kind of explaining how you got there. Then you exited from Verano and went on to do this RM for Wellness thing. Let's talk first about the clinical director role. So you now are serving as clinical director for
Officially MHWC, Maryland Health and Wellness Center. They're in Hagerstown.
So for some
pretty
reason,
much almost as far as you could possibly get from here.
I feel very confident mentioning their name and have no problem if any of our patients feel they need to take a little trip over to Hagerstown.
Come visit
Come
me
see Nurse
on
Lawrence.
Mondays.
She's there Monday from 9 to 12.
11 to 3, but
11,
yes.
Sorry, 11. Well, you need to leave here at 7 to get there by 11. So the clinical director thing has always been a touchy topic for us. I feel that we really followed the letter of the law to its full intent in the very beginning. When we started looking at what the state was asking from applicants, even though the lawyers determined that they used the word may several times instead of the word shall, and in legal documentation, that is a make or break, right?
Yes.
So the state and the legislators and the MMCC always had this intention that every dispensary is going to have either a PharmD or a physician, a real strong traditional medical personnel position, so that these dispensaries don't just become like rec shops or worse. These very well-funded companies say, look, you said the word may several times instead of shall, so I don't have to do that, and that's $120,000 to $160,000 position that I don't have the money to fill, so I'm not going to do it, right? We never wanted to take that route. We always brought Dr. Hoffman on as an equal partner. We knew that for us to execute on our strategy, if we said that we were going to have a clinical focus, we said that we were going to do all these things in our stage 1 application, there was no getting around this. Like, this was going to be our leader. And
Mary Pat's wonderful, by the way.
And she's phenomenal. And the DNA of our dispensary, Mary Pat is everywhere in it. And when I speak to folks with this level of confidence, it's only because I know that I don't know it, but Dr. Hoffman does. And I know, as a patient, have been to other dispensaries, when I walk in and they say, what do you want? Or worse, that's not what our patients experience, and that our patient consultants, because they're trained by Dr. Hoffman, are giving a level of care and attention to our patients that's unprecedented in the Maryland cannabis industry. And then even the fact that there's only a handful of folks that I know that execute that level of expertise. So I have zero issues shouting them out. Brian Sandoval at Curio does a great job.
Yes.
Chrissy at Zenleaf does a great job.
Yes.
We have Dr. Hoffman. Even High Tide, at least has Bob Davis, who's a pharmacist. So once again, at least following through with that medical background. There's other dispensaries when you go into.
Greenhouse Wellness, I'll just say Leslie Apgar too. She's an OBGYN, and they do a lot of workshops for their patients and education.
So there are, but unfortunately we were able to rattle off the handful.
Yeah.
Right.
The 6 of
Right.
of
Six.
the
Out of
100.
102 potential,
85 currently
90,
licensed.
right?
And 80 licensed ones. So this isn't the mentality that a lot of people. This isn't the approach that a lot of the dispensaries are taking. And what you're seeing right now is the commission, through the rules committee, they're bringing back the mandated clinical director. They're going to loosen up some of the requirements, it seems like, especially how much time they would have to be on site. So it'll still be a remote position. I guess what I'm trying to get at is as much, and I gave testimony to this, but as much as I applaud the commission for trying to to make the clinical director position a stronger role and a more effective position in every dispensary. I don't think that necessarily addresses a lot of the concerns that patients have in terms of this gap. So a lot of patients' experiences, they will register with MMCC, they get their number, they go to a doctor, they're in the physician's presence with less than 15 minutes. They're getting a rubber stamp on their recommendation. They're getting the full 120 grams of flower, 36 concentrate. They're not getting any dosing recommendations. They're not getting any help. And then they come to our dispensary lost, sometimes scared, nervous. And it's unique because no physician would send someone to the pharmacy and say, okay, you're going to go get some blood pressure medication, but I'm not going to tell you which one it is or how much you should take. And they'll just help you out over there. Like, that's on them to figure out. I'm like, well, why are they getting the $200 and all of a sudden we're required for doing all the consulting when, like, and how could you have really given that patient a consultation and a quality recommendation if you weren't sure how they were going to use the medication or what the outcomes were? So I am for strengthening the clinical director position in every dispensary in Maryland. However, I think for us to get to where we need to be, and you mentioned this when we talked about topics that you wanted to discuss, there needs to be a more, what I call an interdisciplinary approach. You mentioned a comprehensive approach. It's the idea that if we're really going to create patient outcomes, it's not just going to be done within a dispensary, even if you have expertise at the dispensary. So we have Dr. Hoffman, who has got expertise in pharmaceuticals and cannabis as a medicine, but because of the legal requirements, she's not able to consult on medications that she didn't prescribe. There's tons of limitations at the physician level in terms of what they can actually say and recommend. So it becomes a very nuanced situation where the patient is really left hanging with people not being able to give them the right information if they want to. Some don't want to give it to them. And at the end of the day, we find ourselves trying to treat patients in a silo. So someone comes to us and they tell us that they're on 18 prescriptions, and they tell us that they have 7 different symptoms and 5 different conditions causing those symptoms.
Which is pretty common.
Which is fairly common in terms of at the time that they get to us with our patient population. And we're supposed to, even with a clinical director, just work in a silo and fix all their problems using just cannabis. Like, that's not how people get better. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to hopefully convey to the commission and hopefully let people understand is it takes a village. It's an interdisciplinary approach. We need your pharmacist involved. We need your general practitioner involved. We need your specialist involved. You want your dispensary involved with the clinical director or someone who's appropriate to talk to the other medical providers, right? And when we have that, we've only been able to kind of build that perfect puzzle a few times. But when we've treated comprehensive patients in a way and had patient outcomes that far exceed the goals and expectations that we originally had set for ourselves. At the same time, I can tell you there's other candidates that have come to us where I thought we have an excellent chance of really changing this person's life, but because the other folks aren't on board, because they're not being honest with their other providers or practitioners, we don't get anywhere.
Right.
There's no discipline on the patient side. Cannabis is a medicine. It requires more discipline than I think almost any other prescription out there because of the way that you have to use it. And
I agree with that wholeheartedly. That's one of the things that I find myself telling patients more than anything is this is a wonderful option, and this is the most work you've ever done to take a medicine. You have to keep logs. You have to try things. You have to be patient and not give up. We're going to start low and slow. It's going to take time. We need to have a lot of communication between you and your doctor, and you really have to track what worked, why didn't it work, keep the labels. Like, it's a lot of tracking that with traditional medicine, they're like, did I take 1 or 2 pills 4 hours ago? It's very simple.
Or even better, can I just get my blood measured and my triglycerides were X before I took my medicine and now they're Y, so my medicine's working.
Black and white, right.
If you have anxiety, how do you measure that? How do you measure exactly the impact that? And one thing that I'm really focused on, and I think your path to wellness, this mindset will vibe with you, but some of our patients, they don't get things, but they lose things, like bad things, right? So like, they may not realize that when I wake up in the morning, I used to limp for the first 5 minutes, but now I don't. And sometimes you have to ask them. And
right,
make
what's
sure
missing? I find that, especially, so CBD, that's the thing I tell people more than anything. When they start using hemp-derived CBD, like Peninsula Holistic CBD, or if they use something from the cannabis industry, that when you start using CBD, you don't feel something. Most people don't feel something initially. You're not getting intoxicated. There's not some immediate effect necessarily. It needs to build up in your system. And after a week, all of a sudden, you say, wait a second, something doesn't feel, you're like, what?
I didn't need to take my extra ibuprofen because...
Right. I didn't have a panic attack last night, or...
Well, and just for me, anecdotally, taking our CBD, like you said, I take it at nighttime before I go to bed because I find that's what works best for me. A lot of people take it when they get up, the experimentation part. But like for me, when I take it, I don't feel anything, right? But the next day when I wake up, I notice if I don't take it. Right. So like your mood is completely altered. Like I'm back in like, let's say a bad state of mind, but my anxiety's there, right? You get angry really quick. You're just edgy. Right. And you think back and say, oh, well, why do I feel like this today? Like, what the hell? I had a bunch of good days in a row. It's like, damn, I didn't take my CBD last night.
Yes.
And you take it that night and wake up and feel great. So it's crazy, but it's true.
It really is true. So that's... that education, so I really believe that education is the key to all of this.
And expectation setting, right?
Providers need education, the dispensary teams need education, and the patients need education because they really need to understand if this is your last ditch effort, if the doctor tells you, yeah, we've tried everything, I have nothing else for you, and you go and you get a cannabis card and you come to a dispensary because you think it's the only thing that could possibly work, and then you take it once and it doesn't work, that could be devastating. So I really try to help the whole staff, not just, when a patient is meeting with me, just make sure that the new patients know that this is like a work in progress. This takes a little time in adjusting, and every person's different. Just because you heard your next door neighbor, got these gummies and she takes one a night and everything's good now, doesn't mean that those gummies are work for you. Those gummies could make you paranoid and feel like you're, have chest pressure.
Yes.
You just don't know.
I think it's so important to be honest.
That's what.
There's no. I think for a while. And we had to get the experience to understand it, but I have zero issues in all the confidence in the world saying that the cannabis isn't for everybody, and that cannabis in isolation without other pieces of the puzzle is nowhere near as effective. And the idea is so many people come into us, and like I said, they have horrible lifestyle habits and their behavioral...
They're sedentary, crappy food, horrible diet,
and which strain do I smoke? And I'm like...
An apple.
Run. Take an apple. Eat an apple. Right. You're gonna need diet. You're gonna need exercise. And then if your legs are sore after your exercise and you want some help to sleep, then here's this strain so that you wake up and re-energized in the morning. But you have to. This interdisciplinary approach is something that I've never felt more confident after treating patients for 2 years is needed. And it's not always there for patients, right? And sometimes you have to make these things easier for patients, and that's why I'm so big on creating a campus where we bring everything together. Because as a nurse, can you imagine if you only had one drug and that's the only drug that you had to treat patients, and if that drug didn't work, then you're just like, what, you're supposed to?
And it could do nothing else, no other natural treatments.
And
yes.
I heard you talking one time about a patient with migraines, and they had immediate relief, and then they got a migraine again, they took THC and they didn't get relief.
Right.
That's something that happens, especially with migraines. I'll be honest. Some of these things are tough to chase, and you've been battling this symptom for 15 years with zero help at all.
Well, so even kids with seizure disorders, so seizure medication wears off, stops working for still unknown reasons. And then when kids get on CBD, it could work great for a while and then also stop working, and who knows why. And then adjustments and maybe adding a little THC. I mean, there's just so much to play with. And I believe, based on most of the research I've read, that a lot of it has to do with our body resetting homeostasis, trying to get back to some sense of normal. Yeah. And no, is there high tolerance like with opioids? No. However, there is some tolerance building, right? So taking a break from THC, taking a break to allow our body to kind of figure out, okay, maybe where am I missing this? Where do I need it? All of those things really play a role. And then, and I don't know that we want to get so sidetracked into this topic, big topic, but then there's the financial piece.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing where now that I've been working with this dispensary in Hagerstown for 3 months, I have patients that are regulars and they're coming now and they're saying, gosh, it's working. I'm feeling better than ever. I've been sleeping through the night.
I can't afford it.
But I can't afford it. And so I think I have to go back to taking my sleeping pill, which costs me $3 a month or is free a month.
It's subsidized. And it's just...
And it's so hard.
It is. So we created the Canna Care Fund.
Because you guys probably have the same. I was going to say you probably have similar socioeconomic kind of demographics in Hagerstown as we do
area.
here on the shore, and
Very
we see
rural.
it all the time.
And it's something that we are so sensitive to because it's heartbreaking, and it's such a weird dynamic for me that like a lot of our patients, they are on subsidized medicine, and they literally for $1 copay can go get 60 oxys.
Right.
But for them to get an eighth of flour, which may last them a quarter of that time, could be $60. It could be 60 times more expensive for them to get a natural, which is no different why it's cheaper to get a bag of Doritos than it is to get an apple and fruit.
Right.
But-
And anything
but
organic food is more expensive.
It brings a bigger
right.
question, and we see it every day where patients are forced to make health decisions not based upon what they want to do or what's best for their bodies, but what's in their bank accounts. And
It's the system.
It's incredibly challenging. But
So I hope that the Compassionate Care Fund through the commission comes to fruition at some
we
point.
have a Canna Care Fund at our facility. So because the Compassionate Care Fund for us shows no viability anytime soon, I don't know how it gets up and running.
Right. Me neither.
We started a while ago. We probably have 15 to 20 patients now that are part of the program where they're getting subsidized medicine through us. It's all an internal program. But that's like a drop in the water, drop in the pot of what needs to actually happen. And it is concerning to us, that the patients are put in that situation. And it's heartbreaking to know that they would go back to a pill that has negative side effects because it's better than nothing, and that's all they can afford. So I don't think it's not a topic that we shy away from here, because I think it's important to acknowledge it. People think that as we're acknowledging that we're all taking pay cuts and that none of us are making the amount of money that we once made in other industries, it's also important that patients understand that we're not making windfall profits, and that we're not your medicine isn't expensive because of us. Your medicine's expensive because of what the market dictates as an emerging market, and these folks have a tremendous amount of expenses to support and to get this product
to get up and running.
Illegal business still,
Right.
So
at the end of the day, it's not good for patients, and patients don't want to hear excuses from the institutions that we are. But that's the truth. I mean, right now, the financial saga is real for small business and for patients. And it's something that the multi-state operators don't feel as much as we do. But you're right. It's tough when they have that back and forth.
So I just wanted to share. I forget what it was that you said earlier that made me think of it, but just the comprehensive medicine. So one of the things that I'm enjoying the most is I feel like I'm acting as a case manager or as a guide to help patients along the way. And one of the things that is so simple, that doesn't require someone like me, don't have to have a lot of experience or a nursing degree or a pharmacy degree to do, is having the patient and their primary support person, who may or may not be listed as their caregiver yet, sit down for a conversation. So that initial patient visit, I've spoken now to at least 10 patients who finally got their card, finally got up the nerve to go to the dispensary for the first time. And then normal would be your spouse waits in the car or in the lobby, and you walk into that dispensary for the first time, a 62-year-old woman going to buy an illegal drug, a medication that could get you high without your husband you've been married to for 50 years that pays all the bills and makes all the decisions. Oh, and by the way, you have to use an ATM. I can't tell you how many people I've just helped them use the ATM. So I find that being able to sit down with the couple and talk for a few minutes about cannabis as medicine and why it works, briefly, really high level, what the different options for consuming cannabis are, whether it's inhalation or edibles or topicals, different routes, and how, at least my philosophy and what most dispensaries that I work with encourage low and slow to start. To talk with that partner, that life partner there, I have seen amazing benefit even before they even have taken any medicine. Sometimes these patients aren't even medical cannabis patients yet. They're just wanting to get a card, and they come to the dispensary to ask a question. And I sit down with the partners, and the shoulders come down, the face, like the worry lines just go away. And it's almost like, wow, I can take a deep breath. He's not going to think I'm just getting high, or she's not going to think I'm just smoking a joint.
A lot of people hate coming to our dispensary. I shouldn't say hate, but like they're incredibly nervous. They're scared. There's no excitement level. And I think this was an interaction that I had. So when we first started opening, someone came in and they're like, I just got approved today. And I said, congratulations.
Right.
And she said, no, I'm really sick, and this is really my last ditch effort. This isn't like a congratulating moment for me. And I said, oh, need to really be cognizant that like the same way that I felt like I have my golden ticket because I've wanted legal cannabis all my, for most of my adult life, and I'm finally not breaking the law, and like here's my validating card. Right. For some of them, it's just like, this is like my last ditch effort, and if this doesn't work, I really don't know what I'll have. And the older patients that we have they'll sometimes request a brown paper bag.
They're embarrassed.
Instead of the white bag with our logo on it. They park in the very corner of the parking lot.
And they don't want their neighbors to know.
They don't want their neighbors to know. I even have to be very careful when I see patients out in public of whether I acknowledge that patient or not. Because there's patients that I've like started a conversation with because in my dispensary they're so they shake my hand, they give me a hug, how's it going? And
it's
then,
like a family.
Yeah, it's like a chamber event, and they're like, go away, go away. Like,
I don't know you.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, who's that? Anthony,
somebody showed me your Facebook video one time.
That.
Like to your point though, Laura, I think bringing the spouses or the significant others or like the close family loved ones
the closest person.
It breaks that barrier down because a lot of times I feel like that's what the patients are worried about more than anything is how like those close people that they hold in regard are going to judge them and view them. And if you break it down for the party, they get that support mechanism from the spouse and the partner or whatever. It's probably a way better way to start off.
I have seen really amazing results. I think the resistance with any medication, but particularly with cannabis, if you're feeling super anxious and you're having lots of resistance and anxiety and you eat an edible, you may not just go to sleep, right? You're going to have maybe an uncomfortable reaction.
You feel that, right?
So if you think about these new patients who are anxious coming in, not familiar, and now we've taken one notch down because now their partner is maybe not on board yet, but at least informed and not locked out. That locked out. I just this one patient in particular just really struck me when it was as if she had never used an ATM in her life. She didn't know she had to have cash. She's in the dispensary by herself. And I said, "Can I invite your husband in?" And she just got tears in her eyes because it was such a relief. Because at her age, she didn't think she had to do anything without him. And then we explained that the commission does allow for caregivers and there are ways to include people. But again, if you're uncomfortable having that conversation in the beginning at home, or if you just aren't aware that there is a caregiver program, that's been one of my big pushes recently when I've been doing some talks out in the community is talking more about the caregiver program. Because there are so many people that would really benefit from having a friend or a family member as a caregiver, and they don't. And I really can't imagine why not. I think it's just the lack of education.
I think it's a lot of lack of education. I think the caregiver program still is nuancey to a lot of folks, and they're not truly sure on how they add a caregiver or what that means. And to your point, like there's still some folks that keep this from their spouse or keep this from the outside their immediate family. And for us, you're right. Like, and unfortunately, our current facility doesn't allow us to do that. Our current facility makes us kind of block people out, and because it's so tiny, we can only keep patients in there. But in stage 2 of what we want to do, when we have the campus, it'll be a big part of what we do is that family therapy part as well, and bringing them in involvement. And we've seen it brings. So one thing that never gets talked about is the effect on family members of sick patients. One in particular of our patients, their daughter reached out to us and told us how their mom was a zombie when she was on these pills, and was not a good grandmother, and was really kind of had a shitty lifestyle. Was just kind of drugged up.
Untraditional medication.
Traditional, yeah. She was on opiates and benzos. And this patient came to us, and we got her on a cannabis therapy program, and she literally got off 100% of her benzos and her opiates. Yeah. And her daughter wrote us this heartstring pulling letter about how she got her mom back and the benefit that her daughter has by having her grandmother back. And it was the first time that I thought about like the ripple effect. Like, that's awesome that patient is super excited, but like that patient's now a better dad or a better grandfather or a better husband. And then we see the relationships of folks improve because the spouse isn't sedated all the time.
Right, or they go back to work.
Or they go back to work.
Yeah. They become like someone in the community that is adding value.
Yes.
Yes.
And I just, it's really, I think in our next location to be able to have more involvement with the significant others in the process. And if cannabis, like we had mentioned, is going to be this very responsible medicine where you're going to be required to do a lot, having an accountability buddy or a friend, a spouse to be able to help you. Hey, did you take your CBD this morning? Did you follow your protocol? Or you logging down your information? Because we're both going to go sit in front of nurse so-and-so or doctor so-and-so. We want to make sure that we have our documentation. And I think creating that level of support for our patients, once again, it goes back to this interdisciplinary approach where when our patients are isolated and it's just a dispensary patient relationship, we don't have the same outcomes as if their spouse is involved, that their doctors are involved, their family members are involved. It takes a village. It
takes a village, yes. I'm going to give a shout out to Dustin Sulak, Dr. Dustin Sulak, and his healer program.
Correct.
I've recently went to Maine and trained under him, saw patients with him for a couple of days with a couple other practitioners. Amazing job, integrative medicine, definitely not a cannabis doc. He's a holistic, integrative wellness provider who does breathing and all different things with his patients, as well as talks about cannabis with them.
It's so important.
The breath thing's kind of cool. It's side topic, but like
so I do that with patients now. Like if I notice, I'll just ask them if they in Hagerstown, if they come to see me, they have an appointment and they come in and they just seem really just nervous to sit down with me. First, I'm like, I'm just a nurse. Like it's okay, you can trust me. Like just Nurse Laura, no big
not
deal.
Laura, calm down.
Right. But I'll usually ask, so, you seem like you're a little anxious. Do you normally feel this way? And very often, right, people are anxious. And they might be anxious just because of pain. They might be anxious because of their illness, not even just generally anxious. And I'll say, well, what do you do for that? So before we're even talking about cannabis, well, how do you manage your anxiety? Nothing, silence, crickets. So, well, have you ever tried deep breathing? How about we just take a couple deep breaths? And so we'll start by doing some deep breathing, not in like a really yoga, corny, over the top way, just something really mild that it does help to kind of level set, just blow off that steam for a second. And then I encourage them, to think of other things as we're talking. So later on, if we're talking about sleep, I might talk about a bath or talk about a cup of tea. Lately, actually, it's not just lately, it's because of my time with Dr. Sulak. He recommended quite a bit making cannabis tea with flower. And so it's kind of touchy right now with there being a little bit less flower on the market.
Sure.
But I have found myself talking to a lot of patients about
cannabis
making a tea for bedtime and holding that tea and breathing in and inhaling.
It's crazy because these are all like net breathing. Doesn't cost you $1, right?
Right.
Like tea, very, very cheap options out there. And these like small little biological like things that you can do to tweak your body and the composition of your body along with cannabis is like crazy. Like the breathing stuff to me is wild because I've seen a bunch of stuff on it. I mean, like there's a lot of stuff coming off with like how you can change the composition of your body with the breathing and stuff like that. And like, it's just crazy. And
you can actually have 6-pack abs just from breathing.
It's crazy. I mean, you should.
I believe that.
I mean, if you've seen like, there's this guy, Wim Hof. I don't know if you ever heard of him, but they call him the Iceman, right? So like go on YouTube and look it up.
Okay.
But just by breathing, I mean, he's on Joe Rogan's podcast all the time. They talk about these things.
Joe Rogan?
Really?
Oh my God!
Wow, he's probably got one of like the most popular podcasts out there. He used to be the host.
I only know the podcast.
Fear Factor. He used to be the. You remember that
guy
show
from Fear
Factor? Oh, I remember that show. Kind of.
He was like the host,
So,
and he does a lot in MMA.
Yeah.
But his podcast is a lot about athletic hacks and lifestyle and like politics. I mean,
everything you can think of.
He's had everything from Neil deGrasse Tyson to.
I mean, Elon Musk is on there. It's just like anybody that you can think of. Okay. But like, I guess what I was trying to say is like these little things, and I do it, myself. I call it RCS, right? I'd go for a run, drink coffee, smoke a little bit of cannabis. When you're done, your productivity like goes sky high, right? So like, there's these little tweaks, and I think it's super cool that Dr. Sulak, sees these just little adjustments that you can do at specific periods of time, like during the day, tailored to what you're trying to accomplish, whether it be sleep, calming down anxiety, and incorporating that into your wellness. That's like super cool to me.
It makes
and
so
I'm glad
much
to
sense.
see that you guys are doing that and following through on that.
So I'm
awesome.
just kind of bringing that forward more, and I would love to do even more of that. It takes a little bit of time.
Yeah.
It does.
And that's, one of the things for the dispensaries you mentioned earlier when we were talking about clinical director is if you have a full-time on salary clinical director that's a pharmacist or a provider, the salary is pretty high. And even a full-time nurse like me, full-time salary is going to cost you some money. And with taxes and all the different things the dispensaries are going through, that's a heavy load. So if the commission changes some of those requirements.
And if you have one, they still can't see all your patients. That's my issue is that so I've always said cannabis is a tool. And over the last year, I've really I've made sure that I'm never in a gym less than 2 times a week, and I've
even in the industry now, like you're really working on taking care of you
way more because
that's what we've noticed. All
it's
of us.
really important.
Yeah, and I didn't do it right, and I had all the cannabis at my disposal that I wanted to, and literally, if I'm going to be completely honest, I mean, I was as depressed as I'd ever been. So very little over a year ago.
Stressed,
the industry
not
was
sleeping.
Tough. Our partners aren't in. Right. Everything is crazy. We're not making any money. I have kids coming. Everything is like
baby and then another baby.
And there wasn't enough weed in the world to smoke that was going to make me feel better. And I believe that cannabis has a biphasic effect where there's a sweet spot. Not enough, you don't get it. Too much is not better. It's not always more is better. And especially a very high energy person like myself. So I had to say, okay, how do I smoke less and use less cannabis and get a better effect? Well, I realized that if I don't live such a sedative lifestyle and I make sure I see my personal trainer twice a week, that helps for some reason.
And stress, cortisol release.
Let me take a little 2-day vacation of THC and reset my endocannabinoid system so that I can use half as much as I used a week ago and get the same
2 days,
desired.
like every 30 days, maybe?
I wish it was that good, but probably more like every
90 days?
Yeah, probably every 90, 120 days.
Okay.
Probably about 3 times a year. Yeah. I'll try to do a little cannabis vacation and kind of reset my endocannabinoid system. And typically it's after like a treat yourself period. So December, around Christmas time, I realized that, we just had a lot going on. I was using a lot and I looked at how much I was using, and to get the same desired effect, I was like, well, I'm spending a lot more money.
Right. That's another way to save money is to take a break and then come back.
Saving the money thing, right? It comes back to all the time is, well, are you trying to just cover everything with cannabis? Because maybe you are spending too much. How much money could you save if you worked on breathing? Or if you did transcendental meditation, or if you did all these
went to the gym or went for a walk,
read a book,
exercise,
read a book.
Created exercise. So you say, you know what? Instead of smoking in the morning,
decreased your screen time.
Yeah, instead of smoking,
all those little things.
Instead of waking and baking first thing in the morning, I'm going to go exercise. And when I exercise in the morning, that should get me endorphins. It should give me more energy. Oh, and by the way, that nug that I was going to smoke this morning is still waiting for me when I get home. And now you're using less. And when you use that nug, because you worked out in the morning and you wait until the evening to medicate, you're probably going to get a better desired effect. You're actually going to feel it. So it's also incorporated. And to have a nurse and to have a pharmacist and to have traditional medical experts that aren't looking at this cannabis as the end-all, be-all. A lot of times, if it's just a bud tender and that's all they do, they don't know anything else. They don't know about breathing. They don't know about wellness practices, right? There's weed.
Yes.
And it's not good. And if you have someone who's 62 and they're scared of THC and someone is not microdosing with them and someone is
they give them
not,
RSO. I had this happen.
RSO, or we had a PTSD version.
I wouldn't even touch RSO.
I know, me neither.
Get Jack Herrera. They gave a PTSD patient Jack Herrera flower
goodness.
at 28% as their very first time of purchase. And then they wanted to know why that person had freaked out.
So one of my personal philosophies, and so it's my RN for Wellness business philosophy, is that I don't want to be the only expert. I'm not looking to go into a dispensary. So I'm working with a couple of dispensaries. I'm doing some work with, I think they're all far enough away, not any competition.
It doesn't matter.
We're all friends.
This is the industry podcast.
Yeah,
Potomac Holistics down in Rockville. So I'm working with them some, doing some events for them. And with them, I actually I'm bringing a group of cancer patients on a field trip. It's people who are afraid of THC, afraid of cannabis, but could really benefit. We're taking a little field trip.
Excellent.
And then a little bit with Greenhouse Wellness. And like I said, this one in Hagerstown, Maryland Health and Wellness. And up there, I'm really working to make sure that their staff is educated enough that they understand about low and slow and that they're really careful and they know a couple questions to ask, because we didn't even touch on some of the medical side. Like we talked about people having these long lists, but there are a couple of medications that we know scientifically could cause a reaction of sorts.
Especially during cancer treatment, right? The immunotherapy drugs are very much impacted by THC and CBD, and in some ways you could
slow down the benefit of your cannabis of your cancer medication by using CBD.
Putting someone through a really rough treatment and then minimalizing the impact that treatment will have because they didn't stop their CBD or THC use. And these are things that so I got cancer, like cannabis.
Cancer and cannabis,
but
right? But it's not for
easy.
every single one. And so I've been really lucky that I've been able to develop some resources across the country. I'm working with a doctor all the way out in Oregon, and then Dr. Sulak, who's up in Maine, and another doctor, he's a PhD, not a medical doctor, in Florida. So I have some resources. So particularly the guy in Oregon is really good with cancer. And so when someone comes to me or the dispensary calls me with some crazy question, I reach out to him. I have all these lifelines to reach out to. I don't need to know it all. I just want to be able to help patients and get the information.
Just know where to find
right?
it.
Just having that network and being able to have the resources is half the battle.
And then to share with the dispensary staff, so they know, like when I'm there on a day, a patient doesn't have to come and sit down and schedule an appointment with me. They can just pull me over to the counter. So the other day, someone had hives, and they were telling the dispensary person, it's because of the RSO. And the person just wasn't sure what to do next. And so she pulled me in, and we started talking and uncovering and trying to figure out, well, are we sure? Like, you're making a statement, and of course, I would never tell the patient they're wrong. But let's do a scratch test. Let's do an at-home allergy test. Let's really see and know the allergist isn't going to help you if they don't have a THC test. So, let's try to figure out, is it just a component that this particular processor had in their RSO, or is it actually the THC? And, come to find out.
You could be allergic to MCT, right?
Well, you come to find out that the patient's been using tinctures and all kinds of other products with no issue. And so it's interesting, right? So we need to figure out a little bit more before we're staking that claim that, yes, it was the RSO. So those sorts of things, I've really just tried to sort of spread the knowledge. I've worked in the past in healthcare with people who very much believe that their stake at work is by being the one with the information, and you don't share it.
Yeah, that's your value.
That's your value. I am the information holder.
We don't value that at all.
I don't value that at all. I want to share the information, educate people. So something that I really have enjoyed doing with this particular dispensary is doing some role playing with the staff, really talking about difficult scenarios and what do you do? How do you handle it? We don't want the dispensary owner, Colleen, that I'm working with, she doesn't want her staff to be so reliant on me that they're calling me every day asking for help. Right. We want them to be able to care for most of the patients. Yeah, because the clinical director can't do it all.
Sure. So we got to wrap this up soon. But one thing that is a hot topic, and we talked about people making claims, this vaping thing. Mm-hmm. I have a very strong standpoint of how I feel in terms of what's safe and what's not safe. But before I even influence anything, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'd like to get your feedback. If you want to talk about it at a national level and then even how it would affect Maryland patients, what's your stance on the vaping thing? So
I think it's a very interesting question, very much a hot topic. I think that this most recent, with this vaping lung illness, is a very separate topic than some of the other concerns that have come up over time about vaping, whether it's the flavorings and the chemicals that are being inhaled and the metal. So I want to just kind of back up for a second and share my thoughts on those two pieces first before we get to the more recent
I'm smiling issue. Because if I had to make an argument, I would go down the same track. So go ahead.
Yes. So there was a concern about the metal and the metal seeping into the liquid, right? The liquid.
The hardware itself. So the idea is if folks are leaching, right? So and I confirmed again yesterday, every vape cartridge that's in our dispensary currently has ceramic heating element, or C-cell technology as it's often referred to. There's other technology that would have a metal heating element. Sometimes those metal heating elements actually contain lead. Mm-hmm. What they find is in these lesser, cheaper hardware cartridges,
and particularly refillable ones
and disposable ones, mm-hmm. Where you find either long-term use or cheaper material in a disposable model. They've leached. The lead has actually left the hardware and gone into the solution. So then when you're vaping that solution, you are actually vaping heavy metals. Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, right?
Right. So heavy metals are not good for you. So we need to know.
Coming from the hardware.
Right. Coming from the hardware, right? Not seeping into the flower. There was early on in the grow, I had that experience where we were concerned that metal.
We all became heavy metal experts real quick.
Right.
In case, once again, if you won't remember, but Maryland's got some of the toughest yes. testing requirements in the country, yes. and it threw a lot of the cultivars for a pickle in the beginning, yes. because if there was any trace of heavy metal at all in there, it could have even been the last pan that they held mm-hmm. the flour in.
Yeah, we started lining everything with parchment paper, yep. and then changed to not metal.
It. So, mm-hmm. okay, so the heavy metal piece.
Never had a problem where there was actually metal reported. So that's a piece. And so I definitely advise, similar to how I advise patients about hemp-derived CBD. You have to know what questions to ask. You have to know what you're getting, where it's sourced from, what it's made of. You have to be willing to ask those questions. And I would stay away from a metal heating element, and I would stay away from refillable metal heating element, right? So all of those things.
Okay, hardware check.
And then chemicals. So cannabis has terpenes in it. Cannabis can have all this lovely flavoring if we take the time and do the due process, the long, more expensive way of extracting and processing. Protect the terpenes, pull them out, put them back in. Many companies, some that I know very well, do that, and they do it very well, and they have great tasting, good value, good benefit products with those terpenes. And then we have some distillate where we're just putting THC with some flavoring. I believe, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that most of the Maryland processors are using, even if they're not using the strain-specific terps in some of these cartridges, they're still putting plant-based terpenes. They're still botanical terpenes. They're not fake chemicals. So I feel very confident that in our Maryland medical cannabis vape market, we don't have to worry about synthetic chemicals that are going to give us cancer, although I don't have research to support that. Not yet. We need data. We need data. However, in other vapes on the street or in other vapes like nicotine vapes where they are putting chemicals, chemically flavored who knows what, into those products, I think it's very unsafe to be inhaling chemicals. We just don't know what it's going to do to our lungs and what kind of cancer it's going to cause. And that data is probably forthcoming earlier, because it's federally legal. So we'll wait and see. So that's the history. So those two things, I think, are risks, and patients need to be aware and choose wisely. Then we get to current day with this lung illness, which most of the research that I've read, most of the data that I've seen says they believe most cases are related to the synthetic vitamin E oil. So something that you can use as an agent to thin and make the vape work better, right? And it's inexpensive and
the vitamin E
easy
acetate,
to get.
Which
vitamin
is
E
a
acetate,
thinning agent that they would use to basically change the viscosity of the actual vape cartridge,
right?
Because it's a thicker than they need. Typically,
be
the
able to
formulations
pull
are
on
going to be
it and-
thicker than what you would want to put in a vape cartridge, so they need something to thin that out.
Right. And so we have statements from, I believe, all of the processors in Maryland. I think I've seen one from everyone that I can think of that says they do not use this
Vitamin E acetate
product. So I have no concern about that product being in the Maryland market, in the legal medical cannabis market. However, we're pretty sure that, at least from all the reports in all the other states where it's been reported, that it's a lot of these black market cannabis vapes, or the tobacco and cannabis vapes, where they are using that as a thinning agent. And so that seems to be where the problem could be coming from. And what seems to be the problem is, so vitamin E is natural, right?
Yeah.
Vitamin E
you rub it
isn't
on your skin, right?
bad for our body, and you can take vitamin E supplements. However, it's putting fat molecules into your airway, fat molecules into your lungs. It's like having pneumonia of fat. That's how I tried to explain it to people in like the most basic form. If you just picture like fat bubbles instead of like pus bubbles in your lungs, and it's killing people. That's awful. So with that said, I personally believe that the Maryland market and what we're selling in dispensaries, personally, I believe that they're safe products. I believe that, to the best of anyone's knowledge, we have safe products that we're selling. However, I tell patients, if you feel uncomfortable at all, you should not use a product if you're concerned about it.
Sure.
Like, even if you have no symptoms, even if we guaranteed that it was safe, didn't have these particular things in it, there's still more information needed. Something else could come up. Maybe there is something else that we haven't seen yet, because it's such an I don't want to call it an epidemic, but it's a national crisis.
It's definitely a trend, right? And how much of the trend versus epidemic, I think sometimes I go back and forth between the numbers versus the national media attention. Mm-hmm. So I find that there's three things that should be present for it to be safe. And the first is going to be like C-cell technology, so you're not using any type of a metal heating element.
Right.
Limiting additives. So I personally still use vape pens, but I only use cannabis-derived terpenes. I'm not... there's zero evidence to show any negative effects from botanical-derived terpenes, but I know that personally there's a longer history of smoking cannabis-derived linalool than there is smoking lavender-derived linalool.
Yes.
So for me, it's really about looking at the additives. So I've actually just instructed Cody to we'll carry maybe one or two flavored products, but I'm reducing all the flavored products because I think the flavoring additives, anytime you create additional additives, then you're creating opportunity for something bad to happen, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So additives, one, hardware, two, and then the other piece is microdosing. Like some of these vape pens, they weren't meant to be exhausted in 24 hours.
Right.
This half cart vape pen that you got from Rhythm, that's amazing. If you smoked all half gram of that in 8 hours, of course you're gonna have lung irritation. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of inhalation, right? That's a lot of irritation to your respiratory system. So for us, I think it's about the conversation, saying, okay, there's an absolute place for vape pens.
Yes.
And it's for folks that are microdosing. It's for folks that are going to use products from a Maryland product that's lab tested. So there's no heavy metals, there's no pesticides, there's no additives, there's none of this junk. So it's as much as what's in it, and then also how you're using it. And I feel like that's a conversation that's not happening as much, especially the usage part of it. How much are these people using it? And when we go back to these nicotine vape pens, these douche whistles where they got like a car battery tied up and they're blowing out like looks like a smoke machine. and it tastes like cotton candy. Like,
and smells like cotton. You're right.
How the hell is that like?
Right.
It's about as healthy as eating a whole thing of cotton candy.
And there's nothing in my mind that says that that's the same as a rhythm vape cartridge. Like, the hardware is different, the volume is different, the material that you're vaping is different. So, and when I see a state like Massachusetts ban vape cartridges across the board, for someone that has a knowledge of how many patients benefit, we have one patient who's disabled. For her to light anything is impossible, but she can easily put that pen to her mouth at a PRN basis as needed and immediately get relief. You take that away from her, I would assume that she's someone that's getting so much relief that she'd be pretty motivated to go buy one off the street. To try to
find one, right? Which is where the danger lies.
Where the problems are.
Right,
where she would get sick.
Yeah. Yep. So I often talk to patients and to the dispensary staff about thinking of the vape pen as a rescue inhaler. So the vape pen is for when you're doing your normal treatment. I normally take my CBD oil in the morning, and then I take this tablet. Like, this is what I do, and I had a flare up for some reason, or the weather changed, or I have a migraine coming on. Whatever it is, like something out of the norm. Not my daily routine, and that's when I use my vape pen. Or I'm having a panic attack, that's when I use my vape pen. And so not something that's
I've seen like zero positive effects from folks that overuse vape pens.
Well, because it is so concentrated.
So yeah, and it blows.
Like if it had yeast or mold or something in it, and you're overusing it, it's so concentrated. I mean, you would be more likely to get sick.
It blows their tolerance.
Well, right, because
they're using this concentrated product, and they're using it because it's so handy, and they're just using it. And next thing you know, they're not getting the same relief, and now they don't feel any difference because they're just constantly introducing cannabinoids to their endocannabinoid system at a rate that's more frequent than they would be able to do because of lifestyle.
Well, yeah,
right. Like we could wrap this up. I could run downstairs and use my vape pen real quick, but I wouldn't just smoke a bowl like in the middle of the street.
Right. Well, and I've been talking more recently to patients about using a dry herb vaporizer. So vaping flower, because I'm not a huge fan of, especially if you're not a smoker to begin with, actually smoking.
No one's going to walk in our dispensary having no history of inhalation or combustion. We're going to start with a vape pen or flower or smoke. It's always going to be a sublingual tincture or a tablet or a patch or topical or something like that. Yeah,
something like low and slow. But that's one way, especially if you want that inhalation, but you don't want to actually burn something. And you're concerned about the vapes, the dry herb vaping is definitely a way to go. Especially there's one that has like a nice glass piece that comes out, so it's no metal and no metal. Just if we're trying to stay away from metal.
Yeah.
So I'm finding that for some patients seems to be a good alternative. And I just keep telling people, don't throw away your vapes. Just, even if you're uncomfortable, of course, if you have a symptom, please report it. We need people to report symptoms.
But as of now, there's been zero confirmed cases in Maryland.
Right. Well, 11 reports, but they were not cannabis. They were not medical cannabis.
The MMCC has investigated I think 11 reports, but none of them were proven to be
part of the program,
part of the issue.
Right.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much. We went way over than we were supposed to. Brandon's good at editing everything. He'll get it down. I could talk to you forever, as we often do when we get together. Give yourself a quick plug, your Facebook page, website, Twitter, anything.
RN for Wellness on Facebook, and I think RN for Wellness. You can find me that way on Instagram too.
Awesome.
And available to do clinical director type work at some dispensaries. And
also, if you are a practitioner listening and interested in carrying Peninsula Holistic CBD in your facility, Nurse Laura handles all of our B2B relationships on the other side of the bridge. She's an excellent resource for you. Please feel free to reach out. We can definitely connect you.
Yes,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Episode 1,
it's been
season
so much
2,
fun.
The New Digs is over, man.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Peace.